Captain, a man with over 7,000 hours of flight time, climbs out of his cockpit window at 8,000 feet, mid-flight, over Massachusetts, because something in the sky has stopped him cold. He doesn't radio an emergency, he doesn't alert the tower, he banks the aircraft, a full constellation, to get a better angle on the thing he cannot explain. And when it's over, when the object vanishes behind a cloud after 50 seconds of observation, the official report filed by Air Defense Headquarters, Mitchell Field, New York, carries just one classification stamp at the top and bottom of every page: confidential. But there's a detail buried near the end of that particular report that changes everything. And we'll get there, because what this document is, what this 126-page dossier really represents, is not a collection of crackpot letters. It is the United States military's own internal record of a summer that shook the chain of command. A summer when the reports wouldn't stop coming, and when, near the end of the file, one senior analyst sat down and wrote a summary that no one in power seemed to want to acknowledge existed. That summary is where we're going. But first, we need to understand how we got there. August 4th, 1947. Captain Alpheus O. Powell is the first pilot of a Pan American Constellation en route from Gander, Newfoundland to LaGuardia Field, New York. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, roughly midway between the Everett fan marker and the Bedford radio beacon near Boston, his navigator, sitting in the co-pilot's seat on the right side of the cockpit, spots something. A bright orange object, slightly below their flight level, off the right side of the plane. Powell can't see it from his position, so he does something that tells you everything about how seriously he's taking this. He climbs out of his side window to look, and there it is. About a mile away, at approximately 1,800 feet, a cylindrical object, blunt at both ends, bright orange, roughly the length of a P-40 fuselage. Powell banks the aircraft to get a better look. The object is under observation for approximately 50 seconds before a cloud comes between them. This is written in an official military intelligence report, not a tabloid, not a letter to the editor, a formal summary of information, signed, stamped, and forwarded up the chain to Army Air Force's headquarters in Washington. The document notes something that the official evaluators clearly found important. Powell had over 4,000 command pilot hours to his credit. He was described as calm and intelligent, not given to flights of fancy, and critically, he had a fear of publicity. He was hesitant to tell his story at all, in case he became, as the document says, the object of ridicule. Hold on here, because this detail gets even stranger when combined with what we're about to see. Because Captain Powell was not alone. The navigator on that same flight, Walter I. White, filed his own separate statement, and White's account adds a dimension that the official report takes pains to document carefully. White estimated the object to be approximately 113 feet in length, 2 to 3 feet in depth, elliptical in shape, deep gold in color, with a surface that reflected light. He watched it for nearly 50 seconds before calling the pilot's attention to it, and when Powell finally banked the aircraft to the left, when White lost sight of the object on his side of the plane, Powell immediately exclaimed that he could see a similar object on his side of the plane. 2 objects, possibly, or one that had repositioned. White told investigators he didn't believe it was the same object, because if it had stayed on its original course, the wings and tail section of the constellation would have hidden it from view by that point. The whole incident, start to finish, lasted less than a minute and a half. The file notes that White had flown extensively with Powell, considered him, in the exact words of the report, a very stable person, completely reliable, and not given to flights of fancy. 2 professional airline pilots, 2 separate statements, 1 classified dossier. And this was not even close to the only case in the file. It looks like a normal report, but when you read between the lines, you begin to understand the scale of what the military was dealing with that summer. The file contains a breakdown of 18 selected sightings, 18 cases that analysts at the 4th Air Force chose to examine in detail. The dates run from May through July of 1947. The locations span the entire country: Colorado Springs, Oklahoma City, Massachusetts, Mount Rainier in Washington, Maxwell Field in Alabama, White Sands in New Mexico, Bakersfield, California, Idaho, Kansas, Wisconsin, California again, and then repeatedly Newfoundland. The observers include railroad employees, businessmen with pilot licenses, a CAP instructor and his student, United Airlines pilots, Army Air Forces officers, TWA mechanics, and a constable of the Newfoundland Constabulary. One observer is described only as obviously well-educated. Another is a scientist from the Naval Research Laboratory. Ground and air, military and civilian, from every corner of the country. And what were they seeing? The breakdown table in this document is methodical. Shape, circular, elliptical, flat on the bottom and slightly domed on the top. Color, silver, very bright, sometimes described as phosphorus. Sound, none reported. Trail, none in most cases, though one sighting produced a bluish-black trail approximately 15 miles long. Speed, always above 300 knots, always faster than any conventional aircraft of the era. One object descended edgewise, stopped at 4,000 feet, assumed a horizontal position, flew level for 15 seconds, stopped again, then disappeared. Another, observed by 2 rated pilots and 2 air intelligence officers, all of them described in the report as cold sober, traveled in a zigzag course, much like a water bug, across the sky at Maxwell Field, Alabama, for approximately 5 minutes, performed a 360-degree course change, then turned southwest and was lost in the brilliance of the moon. No plausible explanation was offered by the reporting officers. That line appears in the official record. What I'm about to show you explains why the Pentagon kept this file hidden for years. Because somewhere around page 40 of this document, the analysis shifts. A senior intelligence officer sits down and writes a summary, not of one case, not of a handful of cases, of all of them. And what he concludes in plain bureaucratic language, in a classified document stamped confidential, is extraordinary. The analyst writes that from detailed study of reports selected for their impression of veracity and reliability, several conclusions had been formed. The first, this flying saucer situation is not all imaginary or seeing too much in some natural phenomenon. Something is really flying around. Those words, in an official document, signed, stamped, forwarded up the chain of command. But it's the second conclusion that stops you cold. The analyst writes that the lack of topside inquiries, when compared with the prompt and demanding inquiries that had originated from above during former events, gave more than ordinary weight to the possibility that this was a domestic program, about which the president and others know. Can you believe this? This is actually written in an official document. A U.S. military analyst in the summer of 1947 looking at these reports and concluding that the most likely explanation was a secret American program so classified that even the normal chain of inquiry had gone quiet. And then, as if that weren't enough, the analyst goes further. He describes the physical characteristics of these objects based on the accumulated evidence. Metallic surface indicating at least a metallic skin. A trail, when observed, that was lightly colored, a blue-brown base similar to a rocket engine's exhaust. But unlike a solid rocket, one observation indicated the fuel could be throttled, which would indicate a liquid rocket engine.
Today we are
Circular
examining
or
another
elliptical in
official
shape,
government
flat
file
on the
together.
bottom, slightly
And I have to
domed
tell
on the
you
top.
right from the start,
Size
the
estimates
very
placing
cover
them
of this
near the
folder
size of a
says
C-50
"Destroy" in large letters across the front.
or a constellation. some reports describing two tabs located at the rear, symmetrical about the axis of flight, groups of 3 to 9 objects flying in formation at speeds always above 300 knots. And this final detail, the discs oscillated laterally while flying, which the analyst noted could be snaking. This is not a dismissal. This is not a debunking memo. This is a military intelligence officer attempting to compile an engineering profile of an object he cannot identify. And yet, the file also contains its counterweight. Also in this document is a written theory submitted by a civilian named Nelson, along with a multi-page statement explaining that the flying saucers can be explained as reflections from automobile ventilation windows. He walks through the optics in careful detail. He describes how a bright object in or on a car can cast disc-shaped reflections into the glass of a partially open vent window, making them appear to travel through the sky at high speed. He even recommends that if you want to see flying discs yourself, take a drive at dusk, open your vent window at a 45-degree angle, and watch. At this point, we can no longer call it a coincidence that this report was placed in the same file, because the military was doing exactly what you do when you don't know what something is. You gather every explanation you can find. You invite the skeptic. You preserve the dissenting voice. And then you stamp it all confidential and forward it up the chain. Then there's Kenneth Arnold. If you've ever heard the phrase flying saucers, Arnold is where it came from. On June 24, 1947, while flying his Call Air aircraft near Mount Rainier in Washington, Arnold observed a chain of 9 objects flying from north to south at approximately 9,500 feet. He timed them between 2 mountain landmarks, Mount Rainier and Mount Adams, and calculated their speed at 1,700 miles per hour. His full sworn statement is in this file, along with a life history the military asked him to compile, and the results of an aerial search he conducted on assignment for the Idaho Statesman newspaper in the days that followed. He found nothing. He photographed what he believed may have been an object over the Boise area during that search, a black, round shape that rolled to present its edge, flashed once in the sunlight, and then performed what he described as the beginning of a slow barrel roll before disappearing. The developed film showed nothing. Arnold wrote in his statement, "I have worried over this matter a great deal since seeing it. I took myself aside and said, 'Come now, Johnson, don't be stupid,' but I cannot bring myself to the point of thinking I did not see anything. The impression of the moment was too vivid, too realistic." At the time he wrote that, he had approximately 2,800 hours of flying time in equipment ranging from primary trainers to B-25s. The document doesn't end with Arnold. It ends with something quieter and, in some ways, more unsettling. A British military message, sent from London to the Air Defence Command, references an incident from January of 1947, months before the summer wave of sightings began. During routine night flying practice, a Mosquito interceptor made radar contact with an unidentified aircraft at 22,000 feet. A long chase ensued over the North Sea, from approximately 30 miles off the Dutch coast, ending near Norfolk. 2 brief radar contacts were made. They faded quickly. The report notes that the unidentified aircraft appeared to take efficient, controlled evasive action. No explanation of this incident was ever forthcoming. The message was stamped, filed, and placed at the back of a dossier that would remain classified for decades. After all these pages, after the airline captains and the army officers and the mechanics and the constables and the scientists, only one question remains. The analyst who wrote that summary conclusion believed this was a domestic project, something the president knew about, a secret so protected that even the normal machinery of military inquiry had been switched off. But the objects in this file were observed from ground and air. They were tracked on radar. They were photographed, however inconclusively. They moved in ways that, in the words of the reporting officers, acted contrary to any common aerodynamical laws. They were seen over Newfoundland, over New Mexico, over Alabama, over the North Sea. The military's own analyst looked at all of it and reached for the most rational explanation available to him in 1947. Whether that explanation was right, whether it was the beginning of something or the end of something, or the misidentification of something entirely mundane, the file itself does not say. It only records what was seen, what was said, and what was concluded by the people who were there, and then it closes, stamped confidential at the top and bottom of every page.